The rise of agriculture was not a single event, but a scattered spark, igniting in a few corners of the world while others stayed dark. The Fertile Crescent, China, Mesoamerica, each became a cradle of domestication. Elsewhere, people watched, traded, or were overtaken. In this chapter, we follow the spread of farming across continents, tracing the roots of civilization back to geography itself, to the ancient landscapes that still shape human destiny today. The geography of food and domestication. Food production didn't emerge everywhere at once. Geography determined which regions could grow crops and raise animals early, and which remained hunter-gatherer societies for millennia longer. Even among fertile areas, only some developed agriculture independently. Others adopted it later, often through migration or trade. The Fertile Crescent in Southwest Asia was among the first to domesticate plants and animals. Thanks to its abundance of wild species suitable for cultivation and herding, its mild climate and diverse terrain provided rich opportunities. In contrast, regions like California, the Argentine Pampas, and southeastern Australia, now fertile farmlands, remained untouched by agriculture until the modern era. Independent centers of domestication arose in the Fertile Crescent, China, Mesoamerica, the Andes, and the eastern United States. Possible secondary centers existed in Africa's Sahel and West Africa, Ethiopia, and New Guinea. In each, local peoples domesticated native plants and sometimes animals before any external influence arrived. Elsewhere, agriculture spread through diffusion. Crops and livestock moved to new lands, carried by migrating farmers or traded across cultural borders. The process of identifying where and when domestication began relies on archaeology. Charred seeds, animal bones, and tools for grinding and storage tell the story. Radiocarbon dating helps establish timelines, though challenges such as soil mixing and contamination can obscure details. By comparing wild and domesticated species, scientists can trace their origins and movement. Understanding these origins reveals a striking pattern. Societies that began farming early had thousands of years head start in developing technology, hierarchy, and population density. Those who remained foragers could not match the productivity or resilience of agrarian communities. Geography, the distribution of domesticable species, and the ease of their spread largely decided the fate of civilizations. How farming spread across the world. After agriculture began in a few core regions, it spread outward through a mix of cultural borrowing, trade, and migration. In Europe, farming arrived from the Near East around 7000 BC as settlers brought wheat, barley, and livestock. Indigenous Europeans adopted some crops but also domesticated local species such as the poppy and oats. In the Indus Valley, people first cultivated Near Eastern grains before adding local sesame and zebu cattle. Egypt followed a similar pattern. Imported wheat and barley combined with native crops like the sycamore fig. Some regions adopted farming gradually. Native groups in the American Southwest and Southern Africa integrated new crops into existing foraging economies. Others experienced abrupt transformations as incoming farmers displaced indigenous peoples. This replacement was often driven by population pressure. Food producers simply outnumbered hunter-gatherers. Technological innovations like irrigation, plowing, and food storage accelerated agricultural spread. Domesticated animals provided transport, pulling plows and carrying goods. The geographic orientation of continents played a critical role. Eurasia's east-west axis allowed crops and livestock to spread easily across similar climates, while the north-south orientations of the Americas and Africa slowed diffusion through deserts and tropics. By 4000 BC, a global divide had emerged. Eurasia supported vast, connected civilizations. The Americas and sub-Saharan Africa remained regionally isolated. The earliest farmers became history's haves, with food surpluses, dense populations, and complex political structures. Those without agriculture stayed as small, mobile bands, eventually overrun or assimilated by their food-producing neighbors. Why food production began in some places first. Not every fertile land gave rise to agriculture. Ecological and biological factors limited where it could begin. The first farmers were opportunists, selecting plants that grew quickly, yielded large seeds, and could be stored. Regions with diverse wild species provided more choices for experimentation. In contrast, lands rich in forest or game offered less incentive to plant crops. The Fertile Crescent held an exceptional combination of domesticable plants like wheat, barley, lentils, and flax, alongside animals such as sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle. China followed with millet and rice. The Americas developed maize, beans, and squash, and the Andes produced potatoes and llamas. Each region worked with what its environment offered. Archaeological evidence shows that domestication was gradual. Wild seeds were gathered, accidentally replanted, and selectively favored for size, taste, and yield. Over generations, people unknowingly altered species until they could no longer survive without human care. Similarly, taming animals involves selecting the least aggressive individuals, gradually shaping them into breeds suited for herding and labor. The timing of food production was also influenced by climate stability. After the last ice age, warmer, wetter conditions promoted plant growth and encouraged settlement. Where rainfall was consistent, agriculture flourished. Where droughts or floods prevailed, people remained mobile. Ultimately, the early rise of farming in certain regions gave their descendants a lasting advantage, a foundation for population growth, political organization, and technological progress. Those who adopted agriculture late or not at all entered the modern world with far less time to build the same systems. Tools, technology, and the legacy of farming. Once farming took root, it transformed human life in every dimension. Permanent settlements replaced nomadic camps. Food surpluses allowed the growth of villages, then towns, and eventually cities. Stored grain supported artisans, traders, priests, and rulers, creating the first specialized economies and bureaucracies. Agriculture also spurred technological innovation. The need to manage water led to irrigation systems. The plow increased productivity. Pottery stored harvests. Domesticated animals served as transport, fertilizer sources, and companions in labor. Metallurgy, writing, and mathematics followed as tools for managing increasingly complex societies. But with these advances came new challenges. Dense populations invited disease, many of them evolving from animal microbes. Hierarchies hardened into class systems, and warfare intensified as surplus resources became prizes worth fighting for. Farmers altered landscapes on a vast scale, deforesting, irrigating, and reshaping ecosystems to suit their crops. Despite its costs, agriculture laid the groundwork for civilization itself. The world's empires, religions, and technologies all trace back to the moment humans learned to control their food supply. Geography determined where that moment came first, and history unfolded from there. The legacy of early food production remains with us. It explains why some continents industrialized sooner, why others were colonized, and how power has been distributed across the world. The story of farming is ultimately the story of human destiny shaped by the land beneath our feet. The turning of the earth. The world 13,000 years ago was a patchwork of wilderness, forests, grasslands, and icy tundra where our ancestors still hunted and gathered beneath a sky untouched by smoke or cities. Yet beneath that silence, something was stirring, a change that would divide humanity forever. It began not with conquest, nor invention, but with the earth itself. Somewhere in the rugged highlands of the Fertile Crescent, in the valleys of China, and among the river basins of the Americas, a few people turned from hunting the wild to tending it. They bent the wilderness to their will, sowing seeds, penning animals, and unknowingly setting in motion the story of food production. That choice, to plant rather than to roam, would become the hinge upon which the fate of nations turned. In those first fragile farms, the seeds of inequality were sown. The peoples who harnessed crops and livestock gained something extraordinary: a steady surplus, a reason to stay, and the power to grow in number. An acre of farmland could feed 10, perhaps 100 times more people than hunting alone. Cows gave milk and muscle, goats and sheep gave wool and warmth, and the soil itself, renewed by their manure, grew richer. A new rhythm of life emerged, bound to the seasons. People no longer wandered after food. Food waited for them. And from that stillness came numbers, villages swelling into towns, towns into kingdoms. Stored grain meant stored power. With full granaries, a few could rise above the many. Chiefs, kings, priests, those who could command others to fight, to build, to rule. For the first time, food fed armies. Stored crops paid for soldiers who no longer had to hunt to survive. Walls rose and wars followed. The plow turned more than soil. It turned the balance of power. Animals became allies in this new order, beasts of burden that reshaped the landscape. Oxen and horses broke the heavy earth, making the impossible arable. Donkeys and camels carried goods farther than any man could walk. Horses, the great transformers of war, gave speed, terror, and dominion. But the true power of domestication was invisible. As humans lived beside their animals, invisible armies of microbes crossed over. Smallpox, measles, influenza. The unseen soldiers of civilization evolved in the warmth of human and animal villages alike. When these diseases met unexposed peoples centuries later, they would conquer continents without a single sword being drawn. So began the long divide between those who farmed and those who did not, between the builders of empires and the keepers of wilderness. The story of food was the story of tower, and the plow, more than any weapon, would shape the destiny of humankind. The seeds of inequality. For most of our species' time on Earth, people lived as equals, hunters and gatherers bound by need, moving together through the wild. But once the first seeds were sown, that balance began to shift. From the Fertile Crescent to the valleys of China, from Mesoamerica to the Andes, food production did not appear everywhere, nor at once. Geography, not genius, drew the lines of fate. Some lands, rich in wild plants and animals suitable for domestication, became cradles of agriculture. Others, though fertile and green, offered little that could be tamed. In a few corners of the world, Southwest Asia, China, the Americas, people independently domesticated what nature gave them. Wheat and barley in the Near East, rice and millet in Asia, maize and potatoes in the New World. In these places, civilization took root on its own. But elsewhere, most people depended on a different gift, the arrival of crops and livestock from afar. Africa's Sahel, India's plains, and the forests of Europe became farmers not by invention but by inheritance. They learned the craft from neighbors, their fields filled with borrowed seeds. Still, the map of progress was uneven. In vast regions where the earth was kind and the rivers full, California, the Argentine Pampas, southeastern Australia, no one farmed before the modern age. The soil waited, ready, yet untouched. The reason lay not in will or wit, but in chance. In the simple fact that their lands lacked the plants and animals that could be easily domesticated. Food production arose first, not in the lushest lands, but in the marginal ones. The craggy hills of Iraq, the dry valleys of Mexico, and the thin soils of the Andes gave rise to farming long before the great river plains did. It was necessity that birthed invention, hunger that taught humanity how to tame the wild. From these small beginnings, the web of agriculture spread. In Europe, farmers from the Near East brought their wheat and sheep westward, turning forests into fields. In Egypt, herders followed the Nile, their crops and cattle forming the lifeblood of pharaohs. In India, barley and goats arrived from the west, blending with native sesame and humped cattle. In each case, food production carried with it a quiet revolution, not only in diet, but in destiny. Sometimes local hunters adopted these new ways, slowly trading bow for plow. Other times, the arrival of farmers meant the end of old worlds. Waves of agricultural peoples rolled outward, replacing or absorbing the hunter-gatherers who came before them. The story of food was no longer just about survival. It was about expansion, replacement, and power. By the time Europe's farmers reached its western shores and Asia spread into the Pacific, the outcome was already written. Those who fed themselves from the land's bounty would one day command those who still followed the wild. And so the great divide widened between those who grew food and those who were devoured by history. Traces in the earth, The story of food production does not live only in memory, it sleeps beneath our feet. Buried in the soil, scattered through ancient hearths, lie the bones, seeds, and ash that whisper of the moment humanity changed its path. Archaeologists, like patient detectives, have learned to read these fragments, to see in the curve of a horn or the shape of a grain the difference between the wild and the tamed. When they sift through an ancient campsite, they search for signs of transformation. The bones of cattle and sheep smaller than their wild kin, seeds with thinner shells or softer coatings, each a silent testimony that somewhere, someone had bent nature to human will. In the earliest villages of the Fertile Crescent, they find the first domesticated wheat, barley, and oats, dating back to nearly 8500 BC, the dawn of agriculture. To fix these finds in time, scientists turn to the language of atoms. In every living thing, a trace of radioactive carbon counts down toward nothingness, decaying slowly once life ends. By measuring the faint heartbeat of that carbon, they can tell how long ago a plant was cut or an animal was cooked. From these fragile numbers, a chronology of humanity's great transition has been built. Yet even time is tricky in the soil. Floods, burrowing animals, and the slow churn of centuries mix the layers of history together. A grain might lie beside a bone thousands of years older or younger than itself. Only with the precision of modern tools, accelerators that can date a single seed, has the past begun to speak clearly. The picture that emerges is not uniform. In some places, food production was old when others had never seen a plow. The Fertile Crescent led with both crops and animals. China followed with rice and millet, and the Americas came later with maize, beans, and potatoes. New Guinea, Africa, and parts of India joined in with their own inventions, often blending foreign plants with native ones. But knowing when and where is not enough. To understand how these changes spread, one must map the wild ancestors of every domesticated plant and beast. Chickpeas, for example, may grow today across India and Ethiopia, but their wild forebears exist only in a small corner of southeastern Turkey, the true cradle of their cultivation. Wheat's wild roots cling to the hills between Israel and Iran. From such patterns, scientists trace the routes by which farming radiated outward. Domestication was not a single event, but a conversation between people and landscape, one repeated thousands of times, in valley after valley. The fields we know today were born from countless acts of observation, patience, and chance. And in those early gardens, humanity unknowingly set the stage for everything that would follow: villages, cities, kingdoms, and the vast inequalities that still shape our world. The geography of destiny. Once the seeds had been sown, geography took command. Across the map of the ancient world, the rise of food production was neither random nor fair. Only a few regions, the lucky cradles of agriculture, held the wild plants and animals suitable for domestication. Everywhere else, people would depend on what spread from those centers. The heartlands of farming were few: the Fertile Crescent, China, Mesoamerica, the Andes, the eastern United States, and perhaps New Guinea and parts of Africa. Each birthed its own crops: barley and wheat, rice and millet, maize and potatoes, and sometimes its own herds. Yet these gifts were not shared equally, for the continents themselves shaped the path of exchange. Eurasia stretched east to west, its vast span linked by similar climates and seasons. Once a crop or animal was domesticated, it could travel easily along that axis, from the Levant to Spain, from China to Europe. The Americas and Africa, by contrast, ran north to south, crossing climates as sharply different as snowfields and jungles. What thrived in Mexico withered in Peru. What fed herders on the Sahel died in the Congo's humidity. Geography, more than ingenuity, decided how far and how fast food production spread. In some lands, farmers arrived gently, their knowledge adopted by the hunters who watched and learned. In others, they came like a tide, overwhelming the old ways. The hunter-gatherers of Europe, Africa, and the Pacific were displaced or absorbed by waves of settlers carrying their seeds and animals. The world became a mosaic of peoples divided not by race or language, but by access. Access to the crops that fed armies, the animals that carried burdens, the germs that killed unseen. From these patterns rose history's first haves and have-nots. Those who farmed early gained surpluses, numbers, and power. Those who did not were pushed aside or consumed. When the great collisions came between Europe and the Americas, between farmers and foragers, the outcome was already centuries in the making. The birthplaces of food were the birthplaces of dominance. In the dry highlands of Iraq and Iran, in the valleys of China and the ridges of Mexico, humans learned to master the landscape. From their plowed fields and penned flocks came kings, priests, merchants, and metalworkers. The engines of civilization. In the lush lands where food production never began, people remained hunters, equal and free, until history's tide reached their shores, and so the map of the world hardened into its familiar pattern. The same forces that gave one people wheat and oxen gave another only wilderness. The story of the Earth's harvest became the story of power itself, a story still unfolding, sown in the soil of prehistory and reaped in the fields of empire. Epilogue: The future of human history as a science. History in all its vastness began with a question. Why do some peoples have so much cargo while others have so little? After tracing humanity's journey across 13,000 years, the answer comes into focus, not in our genes, but in our geography. Had the ancestors of Aboriginal Australians and Eurasians switched places in the late Pleistocene, the course of history might have reversed entirely. The peoples themselves were no different in intelligence or ambition. It was the land beneath their feet, its crops, animals, and climate that decided who would rise to build empires and who would remain bound to the wild. Across continents, four great forces shaped the destiny of societies. The first was nature's endowment, the number and kind of wild plants and animals fit for domestication. Food production was the foundation for all that followed: surpluses, cities, armies, and states. But suitable species were not scattered evenly. Eurasia teemed with potential crops and herd animals, while Australia and the Americas lost most of their great beasts to extinction. Without horses, oxen, or large native grains, their people remained hunters long after others had become farmers. The second force was the ease of diffusion, how far and fast ideas, crops, and inventions could spread. Eurasia's broad east-west axis linked lands of similar climate, allowing wheat, writing, and wheels to travel effortlessly across thousands of miles. Africa and the Americas, stretched north to south across deserts and jungles, made such diffusion slow and difficult. New Guinea, split by mountains and languages, remained isolated still. The third force lay in the connections between continents. Eurasia shared its species with Africa and occasionally the Pacific. But the New World, Australia, and island societies remained cut off by oceans. While Europe inherited livestock and technology from Asia, Native Americans and Aboriginal Australians faced their challenges alone. The fourth and final force was scale itself. Large continents held more inventors, more rival societies, more competition, and thus faster progress. Where geography fostered unity, innovation could be halted by a single ruler's whim. Where it fostered rivalry, like in Europe, ideas multiplied. These environmental truths are not a denial of human creativity. They explain its uneven playing field. Every people is ingenious. Not every land offers equal opportunity. Some places, by chance, provided richer starting materials. Others, hemmed in by mountains, deserts, or seas, could not join the race until centuries later. Yet Diamond warns that explanation is not destiny. The same environmental forces that once lifted civilizations can also erode them. The Fertile Crescent, birthplace of farming, squandered its bounty. Forests fell, soils turned to salt, and the lands that once fed empires became barren. Power drifted westward, first to Greece, then Rome, and finally to the forests of northern Europe, where rainfall renewed the soil. Europe inherited the seeds and steel of the East, but by fortune, lived on more forgiving land. China's story was different. It rose almost as early as the Fertile Crescent, nurturing immense populations, rich agriculture, and technologies that led the world: gunpowder, printing, paper, cast iron. Its treasure fleets reached Africa long before Columbus ever sailed. And yet, when politics turned inward, China's unity became its weakness. One decision at court, the halting of overseas voyages, silenced exploration across the whole empire. Europe, forever fragmented by its peninsulas and mountains, escaped that fate. Rival kings and nations competed endlessly. When one refused an idea, another embraced it. Columbus found rejection 4 times before Spain gave him ships. If Europe had been unified, his voyage might never have happened. This rivalry ensured that invention, once born, could never be smothered. Thus, paradoxically, China's unity stifled it, while Europe's division propelled it forward. Geography again wrote the rules. Coastlines, rivers, and mountain ranges shaping political destiny as surely as soil shaped crops. The pattern continues even now. Modern technology has shrunk the world, yet the foundations of power remain ancient. Nations that once belonged to early centers of agriculture, Europe, China, Japan, and their offspring states, like the United States and Australia, still dominate global wealth and influence. Others, whose ancestors lacked those early advantages, struggle to catch up. The hand of 8000 BC still presses on the present. But Diamond's vision extends beyond explanation. He calls for a new science of history, a way to study the human past as rigorously as we study stars or genes. History, he argues, need not remain a tale of kings and battles. Like biology or geology, it can seek patterns, test hypotheses, and uncover the laws that shape civilizations. Unlike physicists, historians cannot rerun experiments or rearrange continents. Yet they can compare one island to another, one continent to the next, using nature's own experiments. Why did New Guinea remain tribal while Japan became industrial? Why did Africa's livestock come from Eurasia while America's never left its borders? Such comparisons, if systematic, could turn history into knowledge, scientia. Still, Diamond acknowledges the wild cards, culture, and individuals. A trivial custom born of chance can echo through centuries. The QWERTY keyboard, chosen in the 19th century for the quirks of early typewriters, became the global standard. An accident hardened into permanence. The same may be true for ancient decisions: the Chinese script, the Indian caste system, the proselytizing zeal of Europe's religions. Small choices can shape civilizations. And then there are the unpredictable few, the great men. With Carlyle and the accidents of fate, a single second's delay in a truck driver's braking spared Hitler's life in 1930, altering the fate of millions. Such moments remind us that history's chain of causation is both vast and fragile, stretching from environment to empire to individual breath. Even so, Diamond insists that the broad patterns remain discernible. The collision between Eurasia and the Americas, after millennia apart, was not chance. The outcome, Europeans conquering Native Americans, not the reverse, flowed from 13,000 years of unequal resources, animals, and germs. Such trends are predictable in the long view, even if the lives within them are not. History, then, can never foretell the next election, but it can explain the fates of continents. Like biology or astronomy, it seeks understanding, not certainty. It tells us that civilizations rise and fall, not by divine favor, but by geography's hand and humanity's response to it. In the end, Diamond's message is both humbling and hopeful. We are all products of the same species, shaped by landscapes and chance, yet capable of learning from them. The same curiosity that once turned seeds into harvests can now turn history into science. If we understand how our past was built, on mountains, rivers, and fragile soils, perhaps we can build a future less bound by their limits. The story of guns, germs, and steel is not one of triumph or blame, but of connection, how the earth itself has guided our destinies. The challenge now, as Diamond writes, is to continue that inquiry, to make the history of humanity as knowable, as testable, and as wondrous as the stars above us. Why nations are rich or poor? Why are some nations wealthy while others remain poor? In the richest countries, people earn hundreds of times more than those in the poorest. Geography, history, and institutions all play roles, but which matter most? Diamond begins with a striking contrast. The Netherlands seems cursed by nature, cold, flat, lacking minerals, and vulnerable to floods. Yet it is rich, safe, and educated. Zambia, by comparison, has warmth, fertile land, rivers for hydroelectric power, and mineral wealth. Its people are peaceful and industrious, but its average income is 33 times lower. Why? Economists often point to institutions, the laws, norms, and systems that shape behavior. Good institutions protect property, reward investment, control corruption, and enforce contracts. Comparing nations like North and South Korea, East and West Germany, or Haiti and the Dominican Republic, the pattern is clear. Identical geographies can yield opposite outcomes when institutions differ. Yet, Diamond argues this view is incomplete. Institutions alone cannot explain global inequality because they themselves have origins. Why did the Netherlands develop stable, effective institutions while Zambia did not? To find the answer, we must look deeper, to geography and history. Across Africa, the economic map follows the climate, the 10 countries in the temperate zones, from Egypt and Tunisia in the north to South Africa in the south, are far richer than the 38 tropical nations in between. Coastal countries tend to be about 50% wealthier than those that are landlocked. The reasons are practical. Tropical diseases like malaria reduce productivity and lifespan, and tropical soils are less fertile. Landlocked nations face transport costs many times higher than those with ports or navigable rivers. Geography still shapes prosperity, but even geography is not the ultimate story. Diamond distinguishes proximate causes, immediate explanations like institutions or corruption, from ultimate causes, which lie deeper in time. Just as a troubled marriage cannot be explained only by a single quarrel, national wealth cannot be understood without tracing its historical roots. 13,000 years ago, all humans were hunter-gatherers. Such societies, mobile and small, could not store surpluses or support specialists. Only with agriculture did food surpluses arise, feeding kings, merchants, and inventors, the builders of complex institutions. Farming appeared independently in a few regions rich in domesticable plants and animals, then spread unevenly. Societies that adopted agriculture early gained thousands of years of experience with centralized states, markets, and literacy. Others remained tribal until recently. These differences compound through time. The Netherlands has farmed for 7,500 years, Zambia for 2,000. The Dutch have written records for 2,000 years, Zambia for only 130. Complex institutions evolve slowly. Foreign aid cannot compress millennia into decades. Thus, geography shaped agriculture, agriculture shaped institutions, and institutions shaped wealth. Britain's Glorious Revolution, often cited as the cause of its prosperity, was only a late step in a much older chain of advantage: fertile soil, temperate climate, coastal access, and centuries of political unity. Zambia, landlocked and tropical, could never have had a glorious revolution in 1688, because it had no kings or parliaments to overthrow. In the end, Diamond concludes that the fortunes of nations are woven from both geography and institutions, the proximate and the ultimate causes of history. To understand poverty and prosperity, one must read not just the laws of nations, but the landscapes and millennia that produce them.